would say. But I am a child psychologist with a pretty long history and in terms of training and working with children with developmental disabilities, including Down syndrome, autism spectrum disorders, other kinds of developmental disability. I trained in UNC Chapel Hill with the Teach Autism program, as well as the Carolina Institute for Developmental Disabilities. And I went to grad school in Richmond, Virginia at Virginia Commonwealth, and did my postdoc and my residency at UNC Chapel Hill. I just absolutely love working with the developmental disability population. Autism spectrum disorders is my specialty, but through all of the experiences I've had, I'm very passionate about interdisciplinary teamwork, working directly with parents, and using visual supports and strategies. That's one of my big things that I love to do with the families and the kiddos that I work with. I'm a certified TEACH practitioner, so the TEACH Autism program at UNC Chapel Hill, they were instrumental in coming up with the whole structured teaching model, using visual supports and schedules. And so I'm hoping that at the end of today's talk, that I've given you guys some ideas about how to use visual supports and structure to help manage behaviors, to improve compliance in your children, and as well as kind of thinking through how to use this as an ongoing tool that you can use across their lifespan, not just as something that you use for a particular age and then they grow out of it. Okay, so like Maggie said, if you have any questions at any point, please type it in the chat box, and then I will also check in with you periodically, but if you can type it in the chat box, then Maggie can pass those on to me. So thinking about what visual supports are, before I go into this, I was telling Maggie earlier, I tend to be fairly informal during my talks. And so it's going to be, I'm hoping that it's more conversation-based and not so much lecture-based. So feel free to jump in with questions as you need. If you also hear my dog barking at any time, I may excuse myself to let him out. But in terms of what visual supports are, visual supports, again, you guys are, probably already familiar with this term, using visual schedules and supports quite often. But I want to kind of think about it from a behavior perspective today. I want to talk about what visual supports and strategies are and the different kinds of visual schedules and things like that we can use. But I want us to think about them more in terms of how do we use this as a tool to improve compliance, improve behavioral expectations, and increase a child's independence. And I know our participants today, it sounds like there is a variety of age ranges that are represented in our group today. So I'm going to try and see if I can tailor use of visual schedules for all of those different ages and stages of life. So broadly, in terms of visual supports, what they mean is they are all things that we can see that helps us with our communication, with our interaction with other people, with our understanding, as well as knowing what behavior is expected. So let me ask you guys, what are some everyday examples of visual supports that we all use in our daily lives? When we think of visual schedules, typically with children with a developmental disability or Down syndrome or autism spectrum disorder, most often the thing that comes to my mind, at least, is a picture exchange system of communication, the PEC cards, right? But what would you say are some everyday visual supports and strategies that we all use in our daily life? And if you guys want to call those out, I'm going to type them out. Oh, I guess I can't do them. I can't type it when I'm sharing screen. But I just want some examples from you guys.
Can you see the chat box if they pop up in there? Somebody said Post-it notes.
That's right, Post-it notes. Let me see, there it is. Okay, so I have Post-it notes. Are you all able to see my chat box too?
Everybody should be able to see it on there and just in their screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so Post-it notes is an excellent example. What else can you guys think of? That's right, Post-it signs like stop signs, wear your mask in the store, push to open, absolutely. Verbal notes on an Alexa shopping list, yes, for sure. I can't function without my reminders on my phone or my alarm. So those are some other examples. Anything else that anybody else can think of? Calendar events, absolutely. Those are some really good ones that we've gotten here. So, if anybody else wants to add to it, please go ahead and type in the chat box. But you're right. I mean, we have so many different kinds of visual, a whiteboard calendar, absolutely. There are so many types of visual schedules and supports that we use on a daily basis in our life. So it's not just about, and the reason I want to kind of re-emphasize this is because this is part of daily routine for all of us, disability status aside, right? This is a normative thing that we all use to function and be successful and organized in our daily lives. And so one of the most important things that I try to teach for the kiddos that I work with, as well as the families that I work with, is that we want to start very young and start teaching children to use visual supports and visual tools as a way to increase their independence, to help them know what is expected, to lay out expectations clearly in a way that's easily accessible to them, always accessible to them, and to take out that stigma of it being something that just they have to use because of X, Y, and Z. Visual schedule is one of those very easy and one of the most simplest things that we can use when we are working with our children to say, hey, everybody uses it, including me. So there is no stigma attached to use this. This is not a special service that you're getting. Everybody uses it. Mommy uses it, daddy uses it, your teacher uses it. And so it's a nice way to normalize and destigmatize the whole concept. So in terms of, we use visual schedules to learn more about our environment. Like you guys said, these are all examples of visual schedules that we use on a daily basis, right? That we take in information visually that's represented to us as part of our natural environment. And nobody needs to explain to most of us what these symbols and signs means. We look at them and we know exactly what the expectation is. It's very clear. We also use visual cues to learn more about the people that we interact with, right? Facial expressions, body language. We all know whether, somebody is happy or somebody is sad. Are they feeling pretty hostile towards us at any given time? Is it a friendly gathering? Oh, does this group look like a group that I can go into? So we use visual cues to understand those around us. We use visual cues to interpret their body cues where we can, and we try to kind of make inferences about where our standing is in a group. So we rely quite heavily on visual cues for that as well. And then finally, of course, we use lots and lots of visual cues and supports to stay organized and feel more in control of our daily life. So you have your calendar, you have your sticky notes, you have your to-do lists and your shopping list. I only wish I was as organized as the taxes due visual support there. But mine most often just says remember on a sticky note, and then I don't know what I'm trying to remember. But so we use our phones and our sticky notes and our planners and our agendas quite heavily. And if you think about it, a lot of us as adults feel quite proud of the organization systems we have in place, right? Oftentimes, we like to talk about, what are the different things we do to stay on top of our tasks, as moms and as teachers and as as parents, we try to stick to a schedule. We try to keep ourselves organized, and we try to outsource as much of the planning and organization as possible to these visual cues and these visual aids, because there is a lot of other stuff going on. And it also often gives you a sense of accomplishment. So think about, what do you feel like when you use a visual checklist or a schedule, and then you get you get to check things off your schedule and you get through each of the tasks? What are some emotions that you feel when you successfully go through your agenda for the day? And you guys can chat in the chat box. Relief. Yep, relief is a big one. Anybody else? Accomplishment, yep. Yep, you can actually see what you've accomplished. Exactly right. Oftentimes when I'm having a particularly unproductive day, weeks, months, sometimes I like to write down things I've already done just for the pleasure of crossing it off my checklist. And so that makes me feel like, okay, I have only 3 more things to do. I've done 7 things, never mind that I got those done 4 days ago, right? Sometimes it helps you feel, it gives you a morale boost. It gives you that sense of, okay, I can do this, this is accomplishable, right? And so it actually leads to a lot of sense of self-worth, and it helps us feel like we have succeeded in something. And it really is a nice tool to help us, to help ourselves, be successful, as well as help our children be, setting them up for success. This is a really important tool that we can use. And the good news is that visual supports are recognized as an evidence-based practice, right? And a lot, I know, a majority of folks here have children with Down syndrome. So I'm going to try and tailor this as much as possible specifically to Down syndrome, but as you can imagine, there's a lot of overlap, right? Even though a lot of the research has so far focused on using visual supports with children with autism spectrum disorder, I will talk in a few minutes about how it's easy for us to extrapolate that to Down syndrome or any other developmental disabilities, really. And so a lot of time, the National Professional Development Center on ASD, it's based in North Carolina, they have recognized visual supports and strategies as an evidence-based practice to use with children on the autism spectrum, as well as other developmental disabilities. And I have this information here because the Affirm modules, they have some fantastic resources in that website for both parents as well as educators. You can go complete some of these trainings. They're all free. You can print out handouts. You can print out materials that you'll need, other supplemental stuff that you might need that may be helpful to designing visual supports for your children to help problem solve, to kind of figure out. It'll help you type in things. It's a very interactive website, so it'll give you feedback when you type in some of those worksheets and workshop modules, contents and things like that. So I would highly encourage you guys to take a look at it, regardless of whether or not your child also has a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. So in general, visual supports has been found to help with a variety of different behaviors, right? In children with ASD, there is a lot of research that shows that visual supports help with things like facilitating transitions, increasing engagement, decreasing self-injurious behaviors, reducing off-task disruptive behaviors, increasing independence, or decreasing the need for prompts and things like that. And so there is pretty strong evidence. Previously it used to be more anecdotal with regard to using visual supports and strategies, but now there is also a lot more of research backing to say that this is one of the most evidence-based practices. So it isn't as much treatment as much as it's a practice. So like I was saying, we can extrapolate, even though much of the research is with children on the autism spectrum, because the research does indicate that 16 to 19% of children with Down syndrome also have autism spectrum disorder. And similar to those with autism spectrum disorder, many individuals with Down syndrome are strong visual learners, right? And so they tend to process visually presented information much better than they do auditorily presented information. Is there anybody here with a child or with a dual diagnosis of ASD and Down syndrome? If you would want to share that in the chat. Okay, so there is somebody there who is, sounds more like an adult, but somebody with a dual diagnosis. And so you may see, that there are definitely some of the learning styles and patterns. And so, the visual supports and strategies that you may use with children on the spectrum also very well applies to children without, a spectrum diagnosis. I personally think visual supports, again, because of the normativeness with which we use them, the pervasiveness with which we all use them, I think they are a fantastic strategy to use with typically developing children too, with neurotypical kids as well. So in general, increasing visual supports and strategies typically help with increased behavioral success, decreased anxiety about expectations and routines, as well as increased independence across different domains. And I like this quote quite a bit, and I wanted to include that. When we present information verbally, the words are available for a brief moment in time, but when we present it visually, it can be there for as long as the individual needs it, right? And so it's really important to kind of think about that longevity of that information. So it's not, because if you think about children with Down syndrome and other developmental disabilities, executive functioning often is one of the areas that is most severely affected in children. Executive functioning meaning, ability to sustain attention, planning, organization, keeping track of things, following multi-step commands. All of those things tend to be challenging. And using visual supports and strategies is an easy, helpful way to kind of have them outsource some of those challenging behaviors or challenging components of their learning profile and say, okay, you don't have to retain all of this in your brain or in your working memory. Here you go. You just have to follow these steps and check things off as you go along. So visual supports within a structured teaching framework. So structured teaching, just to give you a really brief introduction to structured teaching. Structured teaching was developed it's the model of intervention that's used at the Teach Autism program at UNC Chapel Hill. It was developed decades ago by Dr. Eric Schapler for kids on the spectrum and individuals on the spectrum, really autism spectrum. And the premise there is that children with autism tend to be better visual learners. And what are some ways, and they respond best to structured teaching approaches. They perform best when their learning is structured in a way that's more organized for them. It's concrete, it's tangible, and it relies less on implicit learning, and it relies less on having them figure out what is relevant information and what's not relevant information. So the goal of structured teaching and using visual supports is a big component of that. And the goal of structured teaching is really helping the child or the individual increase their understanding of somebody else's expectation, helping them remain calm and not as anxious, because anxiety often goes hand in hand with their inability to shift their attention to understand change. And so, you see a lot of focus on predictability and routines, and it's really hard for them to switch gears and move on to a different activity. And so having visually delineated schedules and expectations and saying, okay, this is what we are doing first, then we are going to do this, and then third is this, something else that's going to happen, helps them understand, okay, this is the chronology and the sequence with which these events are happening. So it certainly helps them learn better. Again, it speaks to their strengths of being visual learners. It helps them remain calm. It enables them to be more independent, where they are less reliant on you for feedback. What do I do next? I'm done with activity A. I don't know what to do. What do I do next? And it's always, more often than not, it falls to the parent or the teacher to help them know what to do next. So this using visual supports and strategy also helps them be more independent. And then we are trying to prevent behavior difficulties by proactively clarifying expectations. So before I jump into this portion, any questions so far for me? Do you see anything, Maggie, in terms of questions?
Nothing in the chat.
Should I just keep going?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Okay, so in terms of what are the components of structured teaching, right? So if you think about this pyramid, I'm moving my hand like you can see what I'm pointing to on this. But if hold on a second. All right, so this, apologies, I'm going to let him out in 1 second. All right, Ollie. Sorry about that. All right, I'm very happy I'm talking to a group of parents who will empathize. So in terms of this, yes, thanks, Joni. I appreciate the solidarity there. So in terms of the physical structure, this piece right here, that's the broad setting, right? The physical structure is what your different environments are where the child is going to be. So think about what are the different physical environments that they typically are in, school, home, of course, those are two big given ones, but even within those areas, you can physically define the structure of each setting, correct? So for example, bathroom is where we go and shower, we go to the restroom. The dining table is where we eat our meals. The study table is where we work, right? So for example, I'm going to move my chair a little bit, and the only reason I'm not on some fancy virtual background is so you can see that little desk over there. That's my daughter's study area, right? So within her room, that desk and those chairs, when we sit at that desk and those chairs, she knows that, oh, it's time for virtual school. This is what I'm going to be doing right now. And the only time we sit there is during school time or when we are doing school-based work. Similarly, one of the things that I'm going to talk about is what are some ways to maybe have physical structure that will help with behavior management, right? So could we create a calm down area for them, or have a relaxation chair, or whatever. So physical structure doesn't have to be elaborate and fancy. It just needs to be well defined. It needs to have some well defined boundaries. So what happens here? So those broad contexts or broad areas is what the physical structure refer to. Once you have the physical structure in place, the next step that we are using with regard to structured teaching is schedules, right? And the schedules are where we can play around based on the child's developmental level, language level, what they are comfortable with. And I'm going to talk about those different kinds of schedules too, and that tells them, okay, where do I belong? What is happening right now? What should I be doing at this time? That's what their schedule is going to tell them. And then the to-do list is going to tell them what they're going to do, right? That's what is going to help them understand, okay, I am here in this room. This is my schedule. I'm supposed to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but now what am I going to do? So the to-do list is something that we can break down further to say, okay, this is what activity A looks like, or this is what finishing a meal looks like. And then the visual structure really tells them how they are going to do it. So for younger children, some of the things that you want to keep in mind when you're designing a visual schedule is things like this, right? What type of schedule is the most meaningful to your child? How long is the schedule? How does my child, and I'm going to read through this, but then you are welcome to stop and ask me questions, but I'm also going to elaborate on this as we go on further. How does my child interact with or manipulate the schedule so that they can see what activities are being completed? And then where will the schedule be located? And then how will you cue or prompt them to check their schedule next, right? And so one of the things that I really want to focus on and reiterate is that a visual schedule has to be portable. It has to be something that's able to be manipulated by the child. So really pretty laminated schedules that is stuck up on the refrigerator or on the wall in the child's room is nice, but it's not as efficient or as helpful. Because what we want a visual schedule to be able to do is for them to interact with it, right? The child has to be able to interact with it. So, it could be like clipboards with like a sheet of paper where you're just writing it down. If you have a laminator and love to go to town on it, go for it. But if you don't have to feel overwhelmed. A lot of times the parents I work with say, this is great when we do in clinic because you're giving me all the materials that I need and all the schedule and all the laminated cards that I need. How can I make this more accessible when I go back home? Right? And so, like we talked about before, think about all the schedules that we use, right? Post-it notes, a sheet of paper, a notebook that could be dedicated to the child where they write down their daily schedule or check things off. It can be whatever. It could be for older kids, if they like electronic devices. If they like electronic devices, it could be a checklist on the iPad or on the phone. It can be whatever form you want it to be that makes most sense for you and your family, but it has to be something that they can take with them and that they can cross things off of. And we want to make sure that they know when something is done. So when I am done with my reading, I need to be able to cross that thing off my list, or take the laminated card and put it in a finished pouch, or hand over the pencil to my mom or my teacher for me to know that task is done. Now it's time for me to move on to something else. So a schedule needs to be portable, and a schedule needs to be interactive, as well as it needs to clearly define when a start begins and when a task begins and when a task ends. When the child is a little bit older, and if they are capable of reading, and if they're able to kind of read and kind of manage their own, more of a checklist kind of a schedule, it still needs to answer these 4 questions, right? Like, what am I doing? How much am I doing? When am I finished? And what's happening next? So the whole purpose is that the schedule can't be something that they are going to need your help on. That defeats the purpose of the schedule. My goal is for parents to start being hands-on with their child in teaching them how to do the schedules, but then get to a point where all you need to do as a parent or as an educator is to say, check your schedule. If they come and ask you, what should I do now? Check your schedule should be the answer. So you want them to get to that level of comfort with using schedules. Okay, so let me pause for a second. Any questions so far? Okay, so I'll just keep going. So in terms of the physical structure, like I was saying, it clarifies what activity occurs in each location. And so it increases your child's independence to stay engaged in that activity for an extended period of time, because they know that this activity is only going to last until I'm in this physical space. Once I'm out of this physical space, the activity is done and I can go do something much more fun, right? And so we want to make sure that we define clearly what the activity is and where it's going to occur. And like I've said here, you can implement this by making really clear physical and visual boundaries. It's nice to not have any other distractions, whether it's visual distractions or not, or auditory distractions around when that particular activity is happening. And then you're defining that activity by whatever material is available in that location. So a study area is where they're going to find their books and their laptops and their paper and their pencils. The play area is where they're going to find all their toys. The table and the kitchen is where they're going to find all their food related stuff, and the bathroom is where all their bath stuff is going to be. So it's clearly defined that this is what happens here. And you avoid confusion and meltdowns when these things can be as much as discreetly placed as possible. So for example, these are some ideas for how you could do a physical structure, how you could physically structure different areas. This picture below shows a study desk. I would say this is still too cluttered. Typically based on your child's level of comfort and attention span, I would probably just keep it to maybe one bookshelf, a table, and a chair with just like minimal like writing supplies and things like that, and nothing on the walls to kind of improve their attention span. Here, as you can tell, like this is the bathroom where you have the bath toys, and they know very clearly what is expected there. I put the rug in there because sometimes logistically, we may not have space at home to have different rooms for different activities, right? Sometimes the family room has to double as their child's, your virtual school learning center or their homework area. Sometimes the dining table is where homework happens. Or sometimes, you may not have a space for, play specific. They may not be a playroom. It may just be one room where you may have to accommodate that. In those instances, something small like a rug can come in helpful, where you get the rug out when it's time for X activity, and they get to participate in that activity. As long as the rug is out, you bring all the materials you'll need for that activity to the rug. Once it's done, they check it off their schedule, you fold up the rug and you put it away. Does that make sense? So that's one way to make that, because that still gives you a clearly defined boundary, and it still gives you a very tangible visual support of, okay, this is out now, so this is what I'm doing. Okay, does that make sense? The next thing in our pyramid, if you remember, is the schedules, right? So the physical structure is the place. The schedules is it's a visual system that tells your child what's going to happen. So what happens in that area. We want to make sure that a schedule is appropriate to their developmental level. So for little kids under 3, 2, 3, 4-year-old kiddos, if they don't have much language, so typically 2, 3-year-old kids, I like to use an object schedule. If they are slightly more preschool age, kindergarten age, 4, 5-year-olds, depending on their level of object, you can do photographs. You could do, as they get older, you can do kind of a combination of picture and words. And then for older kids and adolescents and adults, you could use checklists. But you want to make sure that the schedule is appropriate to their developmental level. It includes a mix of pleasurable and demand-based activities, right? So we don't want it all to just be work, and we don't want it all to just be play. So you want to make sure that you're sandwiching, fun, boring, fun, right? Or play, demand, play. So kind of sandwich it in between so that they know that something more fun is coming up as soon as this particular task is over. You want to make sure that the visual schedule is something that's understood by them even on their worst day, right? So even in the middle of a raging meltdown, you may need to have a schedule that's calming to them. So something that gives, something that you're able to give them that says, okay, look at your schedule, it's time to go to the calm down area, or something like that. So it's something that's easily understandable. So you don't want to make it too complicated or have too much information on there. Use intrinsically motivating pictures or objects. Capture the child's interest. You know best what your child is most interested in. So I would encourage you to use that, right? It could be SpongeBob that's counting down, or it could be Elsa telling them what's coming next. Or their reward could be earning pieces of Legos. But putting their favorite, using their own intrinsic motivation to come up with a schedule would be helpful to get buy-in. For kids who are older, I like to seek their input where possible and offer flexibility, right? And control, because a lot of times challenging behaviors, anxious behaviors, meltdowns, tantrums oftentimes come because of a couple of different things. One, it could be just communication difficulty. They're unable to express what's bothering them. But 2, it's also that anxiety that comes with a lack of sense of control. We all feel that, right? When we are anxious, we are like, I feel like everything is beyond my control and I don't know how to stop it. So one way to offer them control using visual supports is to say, hey, look at this. Here's your choice board for your break activity. You can choose either reading or playing with Elsa dolls, or, playing on the computer for 10 minutes. So they get to pick what they want for their recreational activities, but you can also implement choice by other means, right? Like saying, okay, so today we have to do math, language arts, and I don't know, therapy, right? But in what, maybe not therapy because it's not fully in your control. But if you say we have to go to the dentist, we have to go to do, after we go to the dentist, we have to do language arts and then target and then playtime. What order do you want to do these three things in after we go to the dentist? So kind of giving them a sense of choice. We have to take a bath today. Do you want to do it before dinner or after dinner? We have to we have to work on writing today, but do you want to do that before your playtime or after your playtime? So giving them a little bit more sense of flexibility and control. So where they know that, okay, the schedule is something that doesn't change, they're still going to have to follow the schedule, but in what order they follow things is up to them. So you're giving them more of a sense of control. Seeking their input is also really helpful in terms of that buy-in you get, even with little children. I use schedules with my own kids, even with little kids. If I can say, hey, it's not me saying it, it's your schedule. Remember we talked about it and we came up with a schedule. It's a schedule that's telling you what to do next, not mommy. That takes away some of that power struggle that often comes, butting heads with kids. The last point is really important. Schedules should not be the same every day. So a lot of times this is important to they know that the schedule is consistent, but what's on their schedule could be different. There are some non-negotiable things like, breakfast is typically around the same time, lunch is typically around the same time, school and dinner. But where possible, it would be nice for you to have I couldn't find a visual for this, so I'm just going to write it down on my whiteboard and show you. Let's say we have so for example, it could be something like this, right? It could be something like, your breakfast, then you go to school, but then you have a surprise activity, right? You can make that fun and you don't know what it is and they don't know what it is. And then you have lunch and then you have play. These are the things that are here that are not surprise are all things that they're anticipating. It's part of their routine. It's predictable. But having a couple of these surprise activities every day, or, even one a day or a couple every couple of weeks, 2-3 times a week, will help teach them that this is not set in stone, that there is still some flexibility and variability within this, and it helps improve some of that rigidity that you might see in some of our kids. Any questions about any of that so far? No? Okay. So like I was saying before, based on the developmental level, you have different kinds of schedule. You have object schedule, you have the first then or the first then next. You could do photographs. The first 3 things I would say is for like younger kids, right? 0 to 3, 0 to 4. The object schedule, first then next, and photographs. As they get older, you can transition to using pictures. And when I say photographs, I mean photographs of their actual physical environment. Them taking a bath is helpful, or a photo of them doing work at the table, them eating their meal. So that's usually so much more concrete and tangible that they know, oh, this is the time that Kaylee does this, right? It's not some random kiddo on a clip art. So it's them. So that makes a lot more sense when they are younger. But as they get older, you could switch to much more, representational pictures or icons. And then you can switch to a combination of picture and words, and then checklists, like I said, for older kids, adolescents, and adults. So for object schedule, these are for our very younger, the youngest kiddos in our group, right? Like your 2-year-olds, your 3-year-olds. And by the object schedule, what I mean is the schedule is really based on you are tangibly giving them an object. So for example, when it's time for a meal, you can have any object. It could be a fork, it could be a bowl, it could be a toy pizza, whatever you want it to be. It could be a place setting, napkin, whatever you want it to be, but it's something that's exclusive just for mealtime that you use, and you get them. That's the object that you're going to give them when it's time to go to eat their lunch, right? So when they get the cup, when they get this bowl, they know, oh, it's time for me to go get my lunchtime right now. Again, some of these things will take a little bit of time to get established, but we want to make it fun for them. So, when you're starting to use visual supports with them, making sure to make it fun and rewarding, them earning stars for each successful activity, or a reinforcement for each successful schedule that's completed. Make it fun and engaging and reinforcing for them, so that they learn that when I get the bowl, that's what I'm transitioning to. Oh, when I get the rubber ducky, let's pretend this is a rubber ducky, but like when I actually get the rubber ducky toy, it means it's time for me to go for my bath. So that's what we are trying to teach them with the object schedule. And this is typically for kids who haven't had any much language, who don't read yet, and so they're at the pre-verbal level. And object schedules work much better for them. And then, of course, as they get older, I'm sure you guys are very familiar with the first then boards, right? So the first this, then that, kind of a sequential activity. And then when they get used to the first, then you can then grade it up to first, then, and then next. And again, remember, whether you're doing it in such a pretty laminated picture cards, or if you're going to just draw on your board and say, okay, first this and then that, and then you just make your own artistry here, doesn't matter. You just need to represent that visually and make sure that they cross it off when they are done. Or if you have one of those pouches, you can say, okay, the card goes in the finished pouch. So, but that part is important. So, first book, yay, now Play-Doh, that's done. So check it off. And now it's time to go for your Play-Doh. So making it exciting and rewarding for them, and having them cross things off is going to help them understand that concept of finish. This is a schedule that's for a little bit older, for older kids who may be able to read. This is a combination of picture and words. And again, this box over here is they're going to check it off to know that, okay, they've done with that activity. And, one thing that I like is, this is clearly for much older kids who are able to read, and for adolescents and adults who are able to read, who are able to be a lot more independent. And again, you can continue to use pictures and words together in a schedule. And the nice thing about visual supports is, even with, you can break down each of these steps into their own individual visual supports, right? Visual schedule. So what does get dressed mean? You can have another visual support that says get dressed means, get your socks out, something that represents, getting your socks, getting your pants, your socks, your underwear, your pants, your shirt, and your sweater and your jacket. So you can represent those visually in sequence for them to know, okay, that's what get dressed means. And so when all of those cards are gone, then you can check off get dressed. Okay, so so you can break down each of these tasks further. Let me pause. Any questions so far about the different kinds of schedules? I don't see any, so I'll keep going. So in terms of challenging behaviors, right? Oh, awesome. In terms of challenging behaviors, I want to recontextualize that as not just oppositional, defiant, maladaptive, stubborn, willfully bad behaviors. I want to reconceptualize it in the iceberg framework, right? So thinking about the iceberg, all you see on top is just the tip of the iceberg, right? There is a whole lot going on below the surface that is contributing for the tip to be peeking out, right? And so if we want to think about challenging behaviors in this framework, whether your child has autism or Down syndrome or any other developmental disabilities, or they're neurotypical, a lot of times there's a whole lot of other issues that's contributing to that challenging or that maladaptive behavior, right? It could be expressive language difficulties, a comorbid medical condition that's causing them to act out. they have difficulty with that executive functioning skills, like I was talking about. Shifting attention is hard. Transitioning from one thing to another is hard. Sensory processing difficulties could be in play. Their difficulty with distinguishing relevant information from irrelevant information, and their difficulty with generalization. So you have so much going on underneath that contributes to that behavioral explosion that you might see, or a behavioral outburst that you might see. So, recontextualizing this within this kind of an iceberg framework, again, helps remind us that, okay, there are ways that we can use some of these coping supports and strategies. So what are some ways we can proactively set them up for success, and not focus so much on the things that they're struggling with, but rather focusing on things that they're able to do more capably, because now we are giving them tools that are more at their level, right? And so I think that, it's one way to manage challenging behaviors using visual supports would be to kind of establish firm rules and expectations for behaviors and represent it visually, right? So for example, if you're saying, if the rule is nice hands or quiet voice, maybe a thermometer like this is a visual support that you can use, where red, if they're in the red zone, it means that they're being too loud. 3 is the yellow is a perfect volume, and blue is too soft. And you can just draw this on a sheet of paper or have a color wheel, and then you can just move the color. You could use a paper clip and then move the paper clip depending on how loud they are being at that moment, to let them know how, so you're giving them feedback to let them know, oh, you're now at a yellow, this is how your voice sounds when it's in a yellow, that's where we want it to be. So you're kind of teaching them through repetition and through visual feedback. Similarly, having things like, no hitting, kind hands, what does that look like? So finding a way to visually clarify expectations for them would be helpful. The second thing that I would say is, using timers. Transitions are such a huge issue for so many of our kiddos. And using visual schedules and timers to assist with transition is a great way to do it. So for example, obviously transitioning from a preferred activity is really hard. It's hard for me, it's hard for you. But it gets especially hard for our kiddos. But in general, it's a good idea to get them used to transitions using a visual support. So things like the apps like a timetimer.com, I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. This is what it looks like. So you can tell them, because 5 more minutes is not going to mean much to many of our kids, right? 5 more minutes is so abstract for a 5-year-old or a 4-year-old or even an 8-year-old. What does that even mean? Instead, to say, okay, when all of the red disappears, we get to move on to something else. It's time for you to move on to the next activity on your schedule. The nice things about the timer is, something that I like to do a lot with some of my, with some of the kiddos that I work with. If I don't always have the timer with me. So if that's the case, you can write 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 on a piece of paper, as you're cooking dinner. If you want them to move on to something after dinner is done, you can just write 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 on a piece of paper, and you can say, hey, when all the numbers are gone, it's time to move on to the next thing on your schedule. And the fun thing about this is you get to decide what 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 stands for. It could be 30 minutes, it could be 5 seconds, it could be, an hour, depending on what is going on in your life at that moment. So, so every time that you're ready for them to strike one more, you want to take this to them and say, okay, cross 3 off. Remember, how many do you have left? 2 more, and then it's time to move on. And so this is an easy way for you to just implement a transition timer or a transition support, where you're just writing 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. They know when all the numbers are gone, it's time for them to move on to the next activity. And trust me, this works. It works. Again, like I said, it takes a little bit time to get established, but once they get established with these kind of supports and they know that there is a positive reinforcement or a reward waiting at the end of each of these compliant behaviors, it makes it faster for them to learn. And finally, I want to talk about some of the other challenging, because I'm also kind of mindful of time. I don't want to keep you guys longer than what you need to, but this is one of my favorite tools with regard to managing challenging behaviors. Creating a calming area, right? I'm a big proponent of positive behavior support. Behavior is much more easily managed when we do it proactively than when we do it reactively. I don't know about you guys, but I usually, once I've had my explosive meltdown with my own children, I try to then come back to it and say, so that was an example of how you should not be handling stress, or that was an example of how I don't want you to react when you feel upset or stressed because mommy wasn't being a good role model at that time, right? I wasn't really practicing any of my coping skills. But so calming area is different than timeout, right? So it's not a timeout chair that they're going to. Instead, you're creating a calming space for them in a safe part of this house, right? It could be a small pop-up tent that you can get for $10 or $20, or it could be, like I said, it could be a calming chair that they like, just a corner of the house, anywhere in any of the rooms, or a little rug that you can say, has their favorite toys, their sensory toys, their favorite books, any kind of other preferred activities that they have. You can create a space. It doesn't have to look this fancy. It could just be a beanbag chair. It could be a rug. It could be a tent. And having some of those activities there is helpful. And the way you want to use the calm down space is that it's not a space they go to only when they are dysregulated. It's not a place that they need to go to only when they are being bad. It's a space that they can access anytime. There is no, only if you do this do you get access to your calm down space. That's not what's happening. We are teaching them that, hey, this space is your space. You can access this whenever you want. But this is an area that you're going to go to take a timeout from everyone else or take a break from everyone else. This is your special corner. You can call it whatever you want. Make it fun for them. But that's, Tyler's special corner. You can go to the special corner whenever you want. We're not going to bother you. But before you go, let's set the timer, right? Let's set the visual timer to say how long they need to be in the calm down space. Sorry, I got distracted by a question and I'll answer that in 1 second. But, they get to decide. You can have them decide, how much time they want to set on their visual timer for them to stay in the calm down area. Because if I had something like that with no limits, that's where I'm going to be all day long, right? So to say, hey, do you want to set your timer for 5 minutes or 10 minutes? Again, you get to decide the broad parameters of how long they get to stay, but within those parameters, they get to choose how many specific minutes or how much they want to set their timer. The calming area, are they allowed to also play in during the day? It's better if that is its own space so that it's not confused with their other play area. I would say, having this be like we were talking about, the physical structure, this would be the physical structure of the area where it's not necessary, it's still fun, it's still things that they get to do, but it's not necessarily a space where siblings are invited, if that makes sense. Your common play areas, if you have more than one child, is where the kids are playing together. But if it's their special space, that's a space they get to do. And if that's where they want to retreat for play, I think that's okay, but you want to kind of reinforce and reiterate to them, oh, I like that you're going there. It really calms you down, doesn't it? Kind of giving them the vocabulary of, oh, that really makes you feel so good to go there and do your own thing for a little while, doesn't it? So kind of describe it for them when they're going there more. And so you want to help them practice this, not in the middle of a meltdown, but something that they're doing as part of their daily routine. Put it on their schedule so that they know the next time in the middle of a meltdown, all you need to do is maybe give them a card with a picture of the calm down space without using any words, so they know that that's where they're going to go. Okay. Some of these are other. So Nayan, did I answer your question with regard to that? Okay, you can let me know.
Yes, she said yes.
Okay, perfect. And then again, these are some other ideas for using visual supports to teach behavior calming and managing disruptive behaviors, right? Like having some of these space, like, you could have one of these posters near their calm down space, where you can talk about, what are some strategies that you use, like smell the flower, blow up the candle. I have this on my desk a lot. I don't know if you can see it, but it's just a strip that has smell the flower, blow out the candle like 5 times. And, it's easy to give this to a child or for me to look at sometimes when I'm feeling frustrated. And then remembering, again, that's a very visual, tangible way to practice deep breathing, right? Imagine you're smelling a flower and then blowing out a candle. You're teaching them exactly what to do with regard to a visual. And then, or having a coping skills wheel, or, the feelings thermometer for older kids. So you can definitely use some of these kind of visual supports to manage to teach them that there are alternative ways to handle those big feelings that they feel, whether it's anger or aggression, and how we can use some of these supports to calm ourselves down. Okay. I know we are at the end of our time, but any questions? And I realized as I was making this presentation that there is so much I want to say about this. It's hard for me to kind of bring it down, but I want to have some time to answer questions. So.
I was also going to say too, for anybody, I have access to a program called Symbol Sticks. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Dr. Nish, but where I can like actually create visual.
Okay. I know of is it Symbol Sticks?
Yeah, Symbol Sticks. So we have an account, like the DSAGC has an account. So that would be something that I could share with the group. And if anybody needs help like creating some of these specific like visual schedules, you want to like reach out to me on that, like I'd be happy to help put some of those together for you guys.
That would be excellent. Yeah, I like some of these other sites. Boardmaker intimidates me a lot. Like I'm scared of Boardmaker because I'm like, I don't know what to do with you. But so in place of some of those formal programs, which is why I tried, because I am not good at it, I try to figure out ways, of other more easily accessible ways to implement those schedules, like the checklist that you write down, or your, things that you create on a Post-it note. But these are some helpful websites where they have the Do to Learn website is pretty great. I don't know if you guys are aware of that, but they have templates that you can print out. You have lots and lots of ideas for ways to implement different schedules. Google Images, of course, things that you can search for that's relevant to your child or your adolescent or teen, and then working with that. I love the digital photographs for younger kids for sure. There is something to them seeing themselves perform a certain action to be able to implement that more successfully the next time for sure. And the Indiana resource is really good too. And the one that I gave you before with the Frank Portergram, with the modules, the Affirm modules, that's also really excellent. So those are all things that I would encourage you guys to check out. The one thing I do want to say with regard to these kind of coping skills and coping strategies, one way to teach them, like I said, the modeling is really important, right? So we want to kind of let our kids know that, look, this is not anger, anxiety, feeling worried or scared is not something that just they feel. We all feel that. And so modeling it and says, you know what, when mommy feels really worried about something, this is what I do. Oh gosh, that didn't quite come out the way I wanted it to come out. I'm feeling so frustrated. Maybe I should go and smell the flower, blow out the candles. Do you want to do it with me? And kind of helping them normalize and also see what you do to calm down, and then practicing it with them, and then kind of letting them know that this is something that we can all do together. It doesn't have to just be Johnny's job to figure out how to handle his emotions using all of these schedules, but I am going to show you how I keep a planner, how I'm going to cross things off my list when I get through my tasks for the day, how I am going to practice some of the schedule, some of these strategies that I've posted up on our wall, or which is in our coping book, how I use it to manage my own emotions, and talking with them about that is going to be helpful too.
We did get a question. Missy asked if you have any tips for coordinating strategies with school for an older child. She said her daughter's pretty computer savvy and a
Mhm.
good reader and really does better with a schedule.
Yeah, I would, depending on how, for if she's computer savvy, things like having a shared calendar with that's accessible for you, for your daughter, as well as school, the teacher shared calendar that you can access, that'll help them see what's coming first, what's coming next, or using Google Docs, something that you can share with the school system. And even if it's something that they have through the school computers, through their school account, if you want to develop schedules or to-do lists or task lists, something, creating a Google Docs that you can share with the teacher and the teacher can share with you, and your daughter will also be able to see it. Some of those things, and I like Google Docs because it allows you different levels of permission, right? Like whether she can edit it or delete things off, you may not want that. So she probably has view privileges, whereas you and the teacher has more edit privileges too. So maybe doing something like that might be helpful. I don't know if I'm answering your question, Missy. But definitely like talking with the teachers, communicating with them and letting them know this is what we are trying at home. It's working well. These are the strategies she's using, including the coping strategies like you all do. These are the things we try at home. This is helpful. We want to see if you can implement some of these at home as well. But with regard to specific ideas, I would think for a computer savvy, older teen, I think it would be helpful to have something like, shared calendars with the teacher, shared Google Docs, or with their therapist provider. Things like that, I think would be helpful.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, anytime. Other questions?
Can you see this one? I think they're just coming to me somehow. Okay, so this is during a meltdown, going to the calm down area, how long should I sit with him? He likes hugs.
Right. I think, how old is the child?
What is he, 3? Emerson?
Yeah. I have a 3 and a 6-year-old.
Okay. So I think one thing that we could do is maybe have a choice board, right? Which includes some of the strategies that you guys use that calm them down most, right? Mommy hug is one, right? Again, using photographs that shows you giving him a hug, or your 6-year-old a hug, like having those photos in place. And then having some other things that also, it may not be as highly preferred as mommy's hugs, but you could have some other strategies in there, like having squishy balls or hugging a lovey or listening to music, something with headphones on, things like that. So having a choice board and then letting him or her choose what they want first, and then setting a timer to say, okay, so what do you want to do first and what do you want to do next? And so again, like for a 3-year-old, it's not that unusual for them to want you to be there to help calm them down, but helping them go to the calm down, going with them to the calm down area and sitting with them and giving them a hug, but setting a timer, that might be helpful. And for 3-year-olds, they may not, if they may or may not know the concept of more and less on the timer, right? Like they may, if they know that 10 is more, like there's more red if there is 10 versus 5, you could modify that accordingly. But if not, even just kind of seeing the passage of time, depending on what else you have going on. If you have 30 minutes to sit with him and hug him and cuddle and then slowly transition him into doing some of the other activities, great. But if you don't, then setting the timer to say, okay, we're going to sit here and watch the red come all the way down, and then it's time for the lovey to come in, and then kind of talking to him or rubbing his back. And then once the timer goes off, you can see if he will transition more easily.
Okay, the timer is a real smart idea because I can spend
Yes.
just a long time
Yes.
with the hugs. Yeah.
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah. The visual
Thank
timers
you.
and they have lots of really nice visual timers. The time timer and rubber ducky icon, that's just a couple that I know of, but I know that you can do those kind of sand timers, but they have those visually colored gels or liquids that go down, and it's oftentimes really soothing for the kids to just watch that too. Versus just the red disappearing. So you could expand an abundance of that is available on Amazon to say visual timers, and you can pick and choose which one you think would be most soothing for the child. to do.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. Other questions?
I don't see any. And then just to remind you guys, I will, well, I've recorded the session, but I also will ask Dr. Niche to send the PowerPoint over so I can share that as well.
Yes.
And then if
And
questions.
And I will include in my, in the PowerPoint, I will include my contact information too, my email address. If you guys have any questions or anything, I'm happy to answer questions. You will get, if you email me though, you will get an out of office. I'm on leave right now until June, but so you'll get an out of office, but don't worry, I will be checking email. And if it's a question I'm able to answer right away, I will. So you can feel free to reach out with questions too. I don't mind that.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. It was such a pleasure and an honor to talk to you guys today. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. And I really hope that I'll get to see you guys again.
Yes, I know it'll be really nice when we can start doing these in person. It definitely makes the conversations a little bit easier, but we really appreciate your time. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity. Take care, guys.
All right. Thanks, everybody. It's good to
Bye.
see you guys.